over the Honors Zoology Notes Intro to Zoology Part 3, which is going to cover the last essential function, body symmetry, and symbiotic relationships. So starting off with the last essential function, that is reproduction. Reproduction is the process of producing offspring. Within it, we have two broad categories. We have asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction. We're going to start off with asexual reproduction. This is when an individual can reproduce without the involvement of another individual of that species. This type of reproduction produces genetically identical organisms, which are called clones. There are a few main types we're going to focus on. The first is binary fission. Binary fission will generally occur after there's a period of growth, and then the organism will split into two separate organisms. In some organisms, they'll part of the individual will separate off and form a second individual, and this will occur in some sea anemones. All right. The second type of asexual reproduction is budding. This will result from the outgrowth of a part of the cell or body region, leading to a separation from the original organism into two individuals. This will occur in some corals and hydras. The third is fragmentation. This is when there's the breaking off of the body into two parts with subsequent regeneration. If the animal is capable of fragmentation, the part is big enough, a separate individual will grow. And this occurs in many sea stars or starfish. And we can see that here on the previous slide with binary fission. This organism had a good bit of growth before it broke up into two. With budding, we have this hydra here, and part of the body, you can see the second individual kind of growing off of it, and then eventually it separates into two. And then fragmentation with starfish, we lose one of its arms, and generally this diagram doesn't show it, but generally you want more of the center on the smaller piece, and then the main chunk of starfish here will regrow that one arm, while the separated arm will regrow the rest of the starfish. Right. Then the last type is parthenogenesis, which is when an egg develops into a complete individual without being fertilized. For example, bees will do this, and they'll produce haploid males, which are drones, and then diploid females, which are going to be the worker bees. All right. Next up is sexual reproduction. This is the production of a new organism from two parents by making use of their sex cells, or which are their gametes. This will maintain genetic diversity in populations, and it will help species evolve when the environment changes. Right. Within sexual reproduction, there are different types of fertilization. The first type is external fertilization. This is when the eggs are shed by the female and fertilized by the male outside of the female's body. This will usually occur in aquatic environments where both eggs and sperm are released into the water. After the sperm reaches the eggs, then fertilization will take place. For example, frogs, fish, mosquitoes, squids, and many other aquatic animals have external fertilization. Right. Then we have internal fertilization. This is when sperm are deposited into the female's reproductive tract. There are three ways that offspring are produced following internal fertilization. The first one is oviparous, rather. Sorry. Can't pronounce this correctly today. Oviparous are fertilized eggs that are laid outside of the female's body and develop there. They receive nourishment from the yolk that's part of the egg. This will occur in some bony fish, a lot of reptiles, some cartilaginous fish, which are mostly sharks, some amphibians, a few mammals, not really many, and all birds. All right, so these are going to be the egg layers, like your stereotypical egg-laying animals. Right. Then there's ovoviviparous. These are going to be fertilized eggs that are retained inside the female, and the embryo obtains its nourishment from the egg's yolk. The eggs are retained in the female's body until they hatch inside of her, or she'll lay the eggs right before they hatch. The process helps protect the eggs until they're hatching, versus, for instance, birds that lay their eggs in a nest. Some predator could come to the nest and eat the eggs. In this case, the eggs stay inside of her, so there's no predator coming into a nest. Examples of this occurs in some bony fish, some sharks, lizards, some snakes, vipers, which are a type of snake, and some invertebrate animals. Then the last is viviparous, which are when the young are born alive. They obtain their new nourishment from the female and are born in varying states of maturity, depending on the animals or the organism. This occurs in most mammals, some cartilaginous fish, which are sharks, and a few reptiles. All right, moving on to symbiotic relationships. We're done with essential functions now. So, symbiotic relationships. Symbiosis is any relationship or interaction between two dissimilar organisms. So, um, basically, like two animals you wouldn't think would get along or have any kind of relationship, and they do. All right. So, there's a few different kinds of symbiosis depending on whether one or the other or both of them benefit from the relationship. So the first one is mutualism. This is a symbiotic relationship in which both species are going to benefit from the relationship. All right. For instance, I forget the name of these birds in this picture. I need to look up this example again. But they'll hang out on zebras and they'll get the bugs that are in the zebra's coat. So they get food from the zebra, while the zebra gets the benefit of being kept clean and being kept free of the bugs and the parasites living on in its hair. Right. Same with the famous clownfish and sea anemone relationship. The clownfish gets a safe home because it doesn't get stung by the sea anemone. It's got a protective like gel kind of coating on him, so he doesn't get stung, and he also keeps the sea anemone clean. So they both get to benefit from that. Next up is communalism. It's a symbiotic relationship in which one will benefit, but the other one will neither be helped nor harmed. So it's like, one gets all the perks and the other one's just kind of there. Like it doesn't really matter if the other guy's there or not. So for instance, like these fish swimming around the shark here, they like to feed off of the shark's leftovers. So the shark kills something, eats what it wants. There's some little bits and pieces that float past, and this shark gets that. They also get a free ride sometimes when they attach themselves to the shark and don't have to expend the extra energy. For the shark, it's kind of probably annoying to have something always hanging around, but it doesn't really harm him or hurt him in any way to have these guys hanging around. Same with these barnacles that'll attach themselves to whales and other slow moving animals. Um, they get a free ride around and get fresh nutrients to filter from the water. And the whale, while it's probably annoying to have this thing attached to you, it's not really harmed for the most part with having that attached. Now, if they grow big enough, it can be harmful, but generally, just a little bit on there is not typically considered harmful. Right. And the last relationship is parasitism or parasitism. It's a symbiotic relationship, and when one organism lives in or on another organism, and it's going to cause harm to it. So when we get to the worm unit, we're going to talk a lot about parasites. It gets kind of gross, kind of interesting. Just depends on your take on things. But a lot of worms are going to be parasites for other animals, right? Like heartworms and roundworms and tapeworms and all that kind of gross stuff, right? Moving on to body symmetry, it's pretty easy and pretty basic stuff. So symmetry is the balance in body proportions. There are going to be three main types of body symmetry within the animal kingdom. The first is asymmetrical. It's going to have no definite shape or symmetry within it. As you can see here with these corals and a lot of sponges, they're just going to kind of grow randomly and not have this symmetry within it. Versus radial symmetry, the body's arranged in a circle from at least one vantage point. So generally, like with jellyfish, like if we look down from the top down or the bottom up, we see that radial symmetry. It doesn't mean it has to have radial symmetry from every angle, right? Like if you look at a jellyfish from the side like this, we have more of what's considered bilateral symmetry versus radial symmetry. All right, and then the last is bilateral symmetry, which is divided in half lengthwise and half both sides will match, or for the most part match. They're, like if you look at the person sitting next to your face, there could be a slight difference in their facial features, but overall they have bilateral symmetry. So mammals, fish, tons of animals are going to have bilateral symmetry. All right, majority of animals are going to have that. Right? With bilateral symmetry, and this will come up a lot with dissections, we'll use these terms. So the anterior end of the animal is considered the front end. So using this lobster for an example, it's like the head region of the animal is the anterior end. And then the posterior end is the back end. So the tail end of the lobster here. The dorsal side of an animal is the upper side. So in this case, it's his back side. And then the ventral side is the lower side of the animal. So underneath him, or his belly side, is going to be the ventral side. And these are terms we're going to use mostly for dissection purposes and not really show up anywhere else but in dissections. But in the directions that during dissections, you'll see it says cut like the dorsal side or the ventral side. So we'll refresh these terms throughout the course as we dissect different organisms. But this is it for the intro notes. Please let me know if you have any questions.